The bell above the diner door rang like a warning. A man in a worn navy cap stepped inside, brushing rain from his shoulders. His jeans were faded, his polo ordinary, but there was something in his eyes. Still, knowing. The kind of calm that only comes from holding power quietly. He took a seat in the corner booth, the one beneath the flickering light. Across the room, laughter rose, not friendly laughter, but sharp and small. At the counter, a waitress fumbled with a tray, spilling a drink. The manager snapped, "Maybe try using your hands for once. Brenda." The man in the cap didn't look away. He sipped his coffee, expression unreadable. Because this wasn't his first time watching good people be humiliated. And this time, he wasn't just watching. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and quiet disappointment. Grease shimmered beneath fluorescent lights that hadn't been changed in years. The hum of the fridge filled the silence between insults. It was a kind of place where kindness clocked out early. Brenda, the waitress, had been here for 14 years. She wore the same weary smile every shift, the one that tried, and failed, to hide exhaustion. Her apron was stained but clean, her shoes held together by tape. The customers didn't see her. Not really. They saw refills, napkins, and receipts. "Order up," shouted Derek, the manager, a man who treated power like a weapon and employees like targets. His shirt was too tight, his tie too loose, and his voice too loud. He prided himself on control. "Brenda, table 4's been waiting 10 minutes, he barked. Brenda hurried, mumbling an apology. The man in the cap, George, watched quietly. He stirred his coffee once, twice, observing, measuring, every shift, every tone. The waitress next to Brenda, a young girl named Lila, couldn't have been more than 21. She had soft eyes and nervous hands, the kind that flinched before the insult even landed. When she dropped a fork, Derek sighed so hard it felt like performance. "You're lucky anyone hired you, Lila," he sneered. "If it weren't for your pretty face, I'd have let you go weeks ago." The air froze. No one moved. No one ever moved when Derek spoke like that. Because here, silence was survival. George looked down at his coffee again. Steam rose like a ghost. He tapped his phone once under the table. No text, no call. Just a reflex. Outside, rain hit the glass like impatient fingers. He remembered places like this. Years ago, before the suits and headlines, when he'd scrape by washing dishes, saving coins for bus fare, dreaming a change that never came. He remembered men like Derek, too. They didn't just break rules, they broke spirits. The diner's neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering through the window, half-lit letters spelling eat. Inside, people chewed in silence, pretending not to hear. Brenda approached George's booth, forcing a smile. "Refill for you, sir." Her voice cracked mid-sentence. George nodded gently. "Yes, please." His tone was calm, the kind of calm that made her pause. "Rough day?" he asked softly. She blinked, caught off guard. "No one asked that. Not here. Just another Tuesday," she said, eyes down. "Same as yesterday. Same as tomorrow." He smiled faintly. "You've been here a while." 14 years. She set the pot down. "Don't ask me why." Derek's voice cut across the room again. "Brenda, stop chatting and do your job." Laughter rippled from the kitchen. Brenda's face hardened, not from anger, but from habit. She turned to go, but George said one quiet line that made her stop mid-step. "Sometimes staying isn't weakness," he said. "It's proof of endurance." She looked back at him. For a second, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Respect. Lila watched from behind the counter, eyes wide. George leaned back, expression steady. The storm outside mirrored the one in his chest, restrained, but building. He took another sip. Bitter, cold, unchanged. In the corner, Derek strutted toward a table of regulars, loud men in suits, laughing at his jokes, not noticing the eyes that avoided him. The diner wasn't just a place. It was a mirror. Every cruel word reflected what people had learned to accept. George set down his cup. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, a silent check-in from his assistant off-site. A simple question, still observing. He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he looked around the diner one more time. At Brenda's trembling hands. At Lila's flinching shoulders. At Derek's booming laugh, echoing through the grease-scented air. The mask stayed on. The man in the cap remained ordinary. But beneath the calm exterior, decisions were forming. Quiet, deliberate, and irreversible. Because he hadn't come here for the coffee. He'd come here to test something far more valuable, the human cost of power. And soon, when the time was right, his next message would be simple. Just one word. Proceed. The lunch crowd came and went like a storm. Plates clattered. Voices rose. And the diner sank deeper into its routine of quiet misery. George stayed in his booth, observing, unmoving. His eyes scanned each corner, every exchange, every cruelty disguised as management. At first glance, it all looked ordinary. But if you listened close enough, you could hear it, the sound of dignity being chipped away, one shift at a time. Derek leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, his smirk reflected in the chrome napkin holder. "Brenda, we got a 1-star review again," he said loudly, just enough for customers to hear. Something about cold attitude and lukewarm fries. Any guesses whose section that was? Brenda froze mid-pour. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. "I'll fix it," she said quietly. Derek chuckled. "You won't fix it, Brenda. You'll apologize for it." He gestured toward a family by the window. "Go on. Tell them you're sorry the food wasn't good enough for their high standards." Lila looked horrified. She didn't even serve them. Derek snapped. "Did I ask you, sweetheart?" The diner went silent. Even the coffee machine hissed in protest. Brenda nodded once, jaw tight, and walked to the table. She apologized for something she hadn't done. George's eyes didn't leave her. He saw the way her hands shook slightly as she spoke. He saw the flicker of shame that didn't belong to her. He'd seen this before, not in diners, but in boardrooms. Different uniforms, same cowardice. Lila turned toward George's booth after Brenda walked away. "Sorry about the wait, sir. I'll get your check," she murmured. He shook his head. "No hurry." Then, softer, "How long's he been like that?" She hesitated. Her eyes darted toward Derek. "It's always like that. Just worse when business is slow." George nodded slowly, voice low, "And nobody says anything." She looked at him, that look of young people who already know better but can't afford to act like it. If we say something, we lose our jobs. And jobs don't grow on trees, so... He studied her. "No, they don't." He reached for his coffee again, but it was cold now. Still, he sipped. Quietly, in the kitchen, Derek barked orders, slamming tickets against a metal rail. "Lewis, you call this toast? My cat could grill better than this." Lewis, the cook, sweating under flickering light, didn't reply. He was too tired to argue, too desperate to stay. Brenda brushed past him, whispering, "Don't let him get to you." Lewis gave a faint, bitter smile. Already did years ago. The kitchen door swung shut, cutting off the sound, but not the feeling. A new customer entered, a man in a suit, smelling of entitlement and aftershave. He sat 2 booths away from George and snapped his fingers for service. Derek was there immediately. "Welcome back, Mr. Halverson." "The usual." The man smiled lazily. "You know me too well. Derek, keep the coffee coming." George noticed the exchange, how Derek transformed into a salesman in seconds, his voice suddenly smooth, respectful. Hypocrisy had a scent, and George could smell it. When Lila brought the man's drink, he looked her up and down and said, "You're new. You'll do fine, as long as you smile more." She gave a tight, polite grin and stepped away quickly. Derek laughed along, pretending it was harmless. George's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent, still learning, still watching. Then came the breaking point. Derek called for everyone's attention, waving a printed schedule in the air. New hours next week. Management's cutting shifts. Brenda, you're down to 2 days. Lila, you're on standby until further notice. Lila's face fell. "But, sir, I can't afford that. I pay rent with." Derek shrugged. "Not my problem. Maybe work harder, huh? The girl's voice cracked. "I've been on time every day." He smirked. "Then maybe stop being such a distraction." Lila froze. The insult hit deeper than the words. Brenda took a step forward. "That's not fair, Derek. You know she." "Enough," he shouted, slamming the schedule down. "You don't get to tell me what's fair. You just serve tables." A few customers turned to look. Some frowned. None spoke, because silence was a currency here, and everyone paid in full. George exhaled through his nose, the way a man does when his patience is being tested. He'd seen enough for one afternoon. He took out his phone under the table and opened a message draft. His thumb hovered over the screen, a single word half-typed, but he didn't send it yet. Not yet, because sometimes power doesn't move in anger. It moves in precision. Brenda came back to his booth with shaking hands. "I'm sorry you had to see that, sir. He's under stress. We all are." George looked up at her, steady, compassionate. "You ever think about leaving?" She gave a short, dry laugh. "Every day. But I've got bills, kids, and a mortgage. Life doesn't let you quit just because someone's cool." He nodded. "You're stronger than he'll ever be." She smiled faintly. "Doesn't feel like it." George leaned forward slightly. "It will." From the kitchen, a crash echoed, a plate shattered. Lewis muttered something under his breath, and Derek stormed in, shouting. The walls seemed to vibrate. George turned, eyes narrowing. He saw fear, exhaustion, humiliation, all in one frame. This wasn't management. This was tyranny wrapped in a name tag. He glanced at the ceiling camera, an old model, disconnected. He knew because he'd had it cut that morning before arriving. He wanted to see how the place really operated when no one thought they were being watched. Now he knew. The rain outside had stopped. The world felt quieter. And George, calm as ever, finally picked up his phone again. A single message appeared on the screen from his assistant. "Sir, are we a go?" He typed back 3 words. "Not yet. Tomorrow." He locked the screen and tucked the phone away. Tomorrow, they'd see the truth, who had power, who had kindness, and which one truly mattered. As he stood to leave, Brenda's voice called softly behind him. "So?" He toned. "Thank you for not laughing." George smiled gently, eyes warm beneath the brim of his cap. "I wasn't here to laugh." He dropped a 20 on the table and walked out into the fading light, a man no one recognized, carrying a truth no one could yet imagine. The next morning, the diner opened under gray skies. Rainwater streaked the windows like veins, feeding a restless quiet that filled the air before storms of different kind. George was already there. Same corner booth, same worn navy cap. Only the coffee was different, blacker, colder. He had arrived before dawn, wanting to see how cruelly he behaved when he thought no one important was watching. Derek came in 20 minutes late, chewing gum and adjusting his tie. He didn't apologize. He never did. "All right, people," he barked, clapping his hands. "Let's try to act like a functioning business today." Brenda and Lila exchanged a glance, tired eyes, silent resolve. Lewis was already in the kitchen, frying eggs like a man carrying centuries on his shoulders. George looked around. Something was changing. You could feel it, that shift before a collapse when arrogance grows too heavy to hold. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for proof. Proof of character. Proof of compassion. Proof of what people became when no one was watching. And today, everyone would show who they really were. At 10:07 a.m., the health inspector arrived. Or rather, what Derek thought was a health inspector. The man wore a gray jacket with an ID badge clipped to his chest. Calm, polite, all business. "Morning," he said. "Routine inspection." Derek smiled, turned slick. Sure, we're spotless here." Brenda froze. She knew the truth. So did Lewis. So did George. Behind the counter, a roach darted across a coffee machine. Derek slammed a napkin over it before the inspector could see. "See? Sparkling clean," he forced a laugh. The man raised an eyebrow, scribbling something on his clipboard. George quietly set down his coffee. His eyes narrowed, subtle, deliberate. He knew that man. He'd hired him. 30 minutes later, Derek cornered Lila near the back door. You need to smile more, girl. Inspectors pick up on the mood. You make this place look depressing. She tried to walk away, but he blocked her path. George stood slowly from his booth, his hand tightening around the brim of his cap. Brendan noticed first. Her heart started to race. Derek, she said carefully, stepping between them. Enough. He turned on her. Don't tell me how to run my staff. Brenda. She's just a kid. She's an employee. He snapped, and you're replaceable. Both of you. The inspector glanced up from his clipboard, eyes shifting toward George. A quiet nod passed between them. George sat back down. Not yet. Not until everyone had shown themselves. At 11:12 a.m., an elderly man entered the diner, frail, thin, and soaked from the rain. He shuffled to the counter, coins clinking in his trembling hand. Just a coffee, he whispered. Small one. Derek groaned. Sir, it's $2. You've only got $1.50. Please, the man said softly. I just need to sit. Brenda reached for her apron pocket, pulling out 2 quarters. I've got it. But Derek's hand shot out, stopping her. No freebies. This isn't a charity. The room went still. Lila looked down. Louis stopped cooking. Even the inspector paused his pen. George's hand hovered over his phone. Not yet. He wanted to see if anyone else would step forward. But no one did. So he stood. Excuse me, George said, his voice steady but low. Derek toned. Sir, sit down, please. I'm handling this. George's tone didn't change. You're handling it wrong. Derek scoffed. What are you, the kindness police? The old man's head bowed. It's okay, son. I'll just... No, George interrupted gently. You'll sit. I'll pay. He pulled a 20 from his wallet and set it on the counter. But Derek pushed it back. We don't take pity money, so... George's eyes hardened, a flash of steel under calm. Then you don't take my money either. The inspector straightened slightly. Brenda's eyes widened. Lila whispered, What's happening? Derek leaned in, sneering. Look, buddy, you're nobody here. Don't tell me how to run my diner. George tilted his head, studying him. Your diner. That's right. Derek puffed up. Manager since 2016. Runs like a machine because of me. George's silence lingered, heavy, surgical. Then, softly, you run it like a machine, all right, one that eats people alive. The words landed like a verdict. Derek stepped closer. You want to leave before I call security? George smiled faintly. No, you won't need to. He pulled his phone from his pocket. One thumb press. One message sent. Proceed. The door opened within seconds. 3 suits entered, black coats, umbrellas still dripping from the rain. Their presence changed the air instantly. Derek blinked. Who the hell are you people? The lead man spoke. Corporate oversight. You might want to step aside, Mr. Mills. Derek froze. How? How do you know my name? George stood from his booth, removed his cap. For the first time, everyone saw him clearly. His face was familiar, the kind you'd seen on the cover of business magazines, behind podiums, in boardrooms. Brenda's mouth fell open. Lila dropped a tray. Mr. Cole, she whispered. Derek turned pale. Wait, yo. George Cole, he said quietly. Founder, owner, the man you've been mocking customers for serving. Silence spread like a shockwave. No one moved. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. George's voice was calm, deliberate, every word cutting cleanly through the air. I came here to see how this place ran when the cameras weren't around. I wanted to understand why turnover was high, morale was low, and complaints kept coming in. He stepped closer to Derek. Now I know. Derek stammered. So, it's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. The inspector toned, pulling off his fake badge, revealing a company insignia beneath. Internal compliance, he said flatly. Brenda's eyes filled. Lila clasped her hands over her mouth. Louis leaned against the counter, exhaling in relief. George looked around at the staff, tired faces now lit by something else, vindication. Then he turned back to Derek. This isn't management. This is cruelty, and it ends today. Derek swallowed hard. You can't. But George's phone buzzed again. A message from his real operations team outside. Legal team in position. He looked Derek in the eye. Oh, I can. He stepped aside, nodding to the suits. Shut it down. They moved swiftly, quietly. One began gathering records. Another photographed a kitchen. The last person handed George a folder marked confidential. Derek stood there, sweating, trembling, his authority dissolving with every camera flash. And for the first time in a long time, the diner was silent, not fearful, but free. The diner was frozen in disbelief. The ticking of the wall clock became the only sound, slow, loud, merciless. Derek stood rooted to the floor, his fake confidence dissolving into stammered breaths. Brenda's apron twisted in her hands. Lila's eyes shimmered with something between fear and awe. And George Cole, the man they called Sir and Buddy and Nobody, now stood in the center of the room, still and composed. He didn't need to raise his voice. Power, when real, doesn't have to shout. Let's start with the truth, George said. His tone was calm, surgical. For 3 months, I've received complaints about this diner, reports of verbal abuse, discrimination, unpaid overtime, and falsified reports. He turned slightly toward the suits behind him. My team confirmed everyone. Derek's face flushed red. That's not fair. These people, they exaggerate. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Pressure? George interrupted softly. Pressure doesn't excuse cruelty. The words hit harder than any shout could. The corporate auditors began unpacking sealed folders, laying photos and documents on the counter, expired food labels, ignored safety warnings, fake reviews posted under Derek's name. Brenda's trembling hands covered her mouth. Lewis leaned forward, staring. He made us sign off on those. The truth spilled faster than anyone could stop it. The youngest auditor stepped forward. So, per company code, this location will be placed under immediate review pending new management. Derek spun toward him. You can't fire me. You don't have the authority. George took a step closer. You're right, he said evenly. They don't. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document with his signature on the bottom line. But I do. He handed it to the auditor, who unfolded it carefully. Effective immediately, the man read aloud, Mr. Derek Mills is relieved of all managerial duties. Further investigation will determine restitution and legal accountability. Gasps spread across the diner. Lila whispered, legal accountability. The auditor nodded. There were pay discrepancies in the books. Forged time cards. Those are felonies. Derek's voice broke. You can't ruin me over this. I gave this place my life. George met his eyes. No, Derek, you gave it your arrogance. Brenda stepped forward, hesitant. Sir, I didn't mean to get anyone in trouble. I didn't want to see Lila cry anymore. George turned to her, his expression softening instantly. You didn't get anyone in trouble, he said gently. You reminded me why I started this company in the first place. Her eyes filled. So, I didn't even know who you were. That's the point. His voice dropped to a near whisper. You shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them with dignity. Silence followed, the heavy kind that only truth creates. Outside, rain began again, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. The auditors continued their work, photographing evidence, collecting statements. Lewis signed one. Brenda signed another. Lila, still shaking, signed last. Derek sat in the corner booth where George had been sitting hours before. Same seat, different weight. He looked small now, deflated, the kind of small that comes when power leaves and reality stays. George looked at him one last time. You built fear into every corner of this place, he said, but fear doesn't build anything that lasts. He turned toward the staff. Starting tomorrow, this diner closed for 1 week. When we reopen, it'll be under new leadership and new rules. Real ones. Brenda blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "You're keeping it open." "Of course," he said softly. "The building's not the problem. The culture is." Lila's voice broke through the stillness. "Why? Why go undercover, sir? You could have just walked in as a CEO and fired him." George smiled faintly, not smug, but sad, because power blinds people. Titles make them perform. I needed to see who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. He paused, letting that sink in. Turns out, the most important people in this room were the ones he ignored. Brenda wiped a tear. Lewis looked away, jaw trembling. The suits began to leave, their work done. One-handed, George gave his phone back. A message notification glowed on the screen. Media inquiry pending. Confirmed statement? George stared at it for a moment before typing. No statement, just action. He slipped the phone into his pocket. Then, as he walked toward the exit, he glanced back. One last look at the place that had shown him everything he needed to know about humanity, hierarchy, and hope. Tomorrow, he said quietly, almost to himself, we start again. And with that, he pushed open the diner door. Rain met him halfway, cleansing, cold, and honest. The sound of it filled the silence he left behind. The next morning, the diner sat under a quiet drizzle. No neon glow, no laughter, no insults ricocheting off stainless steel. Just silence, the kind that follows exposure. For the first time in years, Derek wasn't there to open the doors. He was sitting instead in a small, windowless office downtown, his name stripped from the payroll, answering questions from corporate investigators about forged schedules, stolen wages, and vendor kickbacks. His voice was smaller now. "Every, sir, and I didn't mean to carry the weight of consequences long overdue. Justice, George believed, should be calm, not cruel." At the diner, a different kind of quiet filled the space. Brenda, Lila, and Lewis had been called in for a meeting. When they entered, the sight stopped them. The suits were gone. The lights were warm again. The tables freshly polished. And there was George, not in disguise this time, but in a simple gray sweater, sleeves rolled, face open. He stood near the counter with papers spread before him. "Good morning," he said softly. Brenda hesitated. "Are we still fired?" He smiled gently. "Quite the opposite." He motioned to the forms. "You're all being reinstated, with back pay and a raise." Lila blinked. "A raise?" George nodded. "For every hour you worked and weren't paid for. For every insult you swallowed and still showed up." Brenda's voice cracked. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," he said kindly. "Just breathe." As they sat, George explained what would happen next. The diner would close for renovation, physical and moral. New management would come in, trained, compassionate, accountable. Every employee would undergo paid training focused not on profits, but on empathy, safety, and leadership. Because leadership, George said, isn't a title, it's a tone. Lila whispered, "You're really doing all this just because we spoke up?" George looked at her. "No, because you didn't. And that told me how afraid you were. That's what I need to fix." In the corner, Lewis finally spoke. His voice trembled with both pride and disbelief. "So, I've worked in kitchens my whole life. No one's ever come back for people like us." George's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's about time someone did." The rain outside had softened to a drizzle, tapping gently against the window like applause from a distant world. He took a long breath. Derek will face his consequences. The law will do what it does. But this place, this small, forgotten diner, will become what it was always meant to be, a second chance. Brenda wiped her hands on her apron, tears mixing with a trembling laugh. "I can't believe it. All those nights I wanted to quit." George smiled. Maybe those nights were waiting for this morning. Across town, Derek's story unraveled. Corporate records confirmed unpaid overtime, falsified numbers, and multiple harassment complaints buried under fake signatures. By noon, he was permanently banned from any managerial position within the company. By evening, his name trended on local news, not as a boss, but as a warning. Cameras or crowds didn't escort him out. Just quietly, by 2 officers and a folded termination notice. And though George never watched that part unfold, he didn't need to, because real justice, he knew, doesn't roar. It whispers, in policies changed, in wages restored, in dignity returned. Back at the diner, the staff stood together at the door as George prepared to leave. The clouds parted slightly, letting sunlight break through. "Sir," Brenda said, "you could have fired everyone, shut this place down, and moved on. Why stay?" He adjusted his cap, the same one from that first rainy day. "Because if I left it broken," he said quietly, "then I'd be no different than the man who broke it." He looked around one last time, at the counters, the coffee pots, the faces that finally looked alive again. "Take care of this place," he said, stepping toward the door. "It's not just a diner. It's a reflection." "Of what?" Lila asked softly. He paused, smiled faintly. "Of how we treat people when we think no one's watching." The bell above the door rang as he left, this time not as a warning, but as a beginning. 3 months later, the diner didn't look the same. The cracked neon sign that once buzzed like a dying heartbeat now glowed steady, soft blue and gold. The windows were spotless, the booze reupholstered, the scent of burnt coffee replaced by warm cinnamon and fresh bread. But the real change wasn't in the paint or lights. It was in the silence, not the heavy kind filled with fear, but the peaceful kind that comes after healing. On a bright Thursday morning, Brenda unlocked the door and paused. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing in the newness of it all. Her name badge gleamed, Brenda Morales, floor supervisor. Her hands, once trembling from stress, were steady now. Lila was already inside, setting out coffee cups in neat rows. She wore a soft blue uniform embroidered with the words, "People First." Louis hummed quietly as he diced vegetables in the kitchen, the radio playing something hopeful in Spanish. The air smelled of butter, sage, and second chances. When George returned, he didn't arrive with cameras or fanfare, just the same quiet humility that had entered that place a month ago in a polo shirt and cap. Brenda saw him first. She froze, then broke into a wide, tearful smile. "You came back," she said, her voice trembling. "I said I would," George replied. "I wanted to see what you built." He looked around, taking in every detail. The laughter, the rhythm of plates, the kindness in the air. The diner that once ran on fear now ran on trust. He sat at the counter, and Brenda poured him a coffee, just like the first day. Except now, she wasn't afraid to speak. "We kept everything you started," she said. "The training sessions, the new pay scale, the meal program for homeless families." She smiled proudly. "We even renamed it." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh!" She pointed to the wall where a new sign hung, the Morning Grace Diner. George read it aloud, softly. "Grace." "It's what you gave us," Brenda said. As they talked, the door jingled open. A mother stepped in, her child tugging her hand, both of them drenched from the rain. Lila greeted them with a smile. "You can sit anywhere, sweetheart." Then she bent down and handed the little boy a napkin and a cookie from a plate by the register. "First one's always free," she said with a wink. George watched that small act, no cameras, no witnesses, just kindness happening for no reason at all. That was the real return on investment. Later, in the back office, George met with Brenda and Lila for one last talk. He spread out a few papers, updated contracts, profit reports, and new community outreach plans. The diner was thriving, not because of marketing, not because of fancy upgrades, because of decency. "Do you see this?" he said, pointing at the quarterly growth chart. "This, all of it, came from changing how you treat people." Lila smiled shyly. "We didn't do anything special." He looked at her with quiet conviction. "You did everything special. You made it human again." The news spread slowly through the town. A diner once known for cold food and colder hearts had become a small miracle. People started calling it the kindness place. Local shelters got hot meals every weekend. Struggling single parents found part-time work without judgment. And every employee shared profits quarterly because dignity, George believed, should come with dividends. Even the corporation noticed. What started as an undercover investigation had turned into a new model of business reform, one being studied across the company's other locations. One afternoon, George lingered outside before leaving for good. He stood by the window, watching through the glass as the staff moved like a family inside. Brenda is laughing with Lewis. Lila is teaching the new busboy how to balance plates. Customers smiling, unhurried. The place that once broke spirits now restored them. He thought of Derek, not with anger, but with understanding. Broken systems create broken people. But compassion, when consistent, can unbreak almost anything. He adjusted his cap, the same one from that first rainy day, and whispered to himself, This is why I came. Before he left, Brenda caught him at the door. Wait, she said, pressing an envelope into his hand. What's this? Tips, she said with a grin. The staff pulled them. It's not much, just a thank you. He chuckled softly. You really think I'd take this? You have to, she said. It's tradition. He opened it, and inside was a folded note written in Lila's looping handwriting. You taught us that success isn't money, it's mercy. His throat tightened. He tucked the note into his jacket pocket, right over his heart. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight spread across the wet pavement like gold. George looked back one last time, at the diner that no longer smelled of burnt coffee and quiet disappointment, but of hope and butter and laughter. A place reborn not by wealth, but by grace. He smiled, then walked away, disappearing into the sunlight. The morning after the reopening, the city woke soft and golden. Sunlight spilled across damp streets, catching puddles that shimmered like glass. George walked slowly down the block, the diner's faint laughter fading behind him. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, things were as they should be. The Morning Grace Diner stood behind him, no longer the broken place he'd first stepped into. Now, it breathed again. He could still hear Brenda's voice carrying through the open window, warm and steady. Lila laughed from the kitchen. Lewis hummed softly while flipping pancakes. It sounded like family. George paused at the corner and looked back. He smiled faintly, not out of pride, but peace. He thought of how it all began. A cup of cold coffee, a cruel smack, silence too thick to breathe in. And how it ended, with people remembering how to see one another again. He took off his cap, letting the wind brush his hair. The air smelled of rain, cinnamon, and redemption. People passed him on the street. A delivery man, a nurse, a kid late for school, all part of a quiet world still trying to do its best. He watched them with a gentleness that came only from understanding. Leadership, he thought, had nothing to do with money. It was how you treated the person who couldn't give you anything back. Derek never understood that, but maybe, in his own downfall, he'd have to learn. George crossed the street, his reflection stretching thin across a puddle. In it, he didn't see a billionaire or a CEO, just a man who'd once forgotten what mattered, and found it again in a small, tired diner that taught him grace. At the next corner, he turned one last time. Through the diner window, Brenda noticed him standing there. She waved, a knowing smile breaking across her face. He raised a hand back, just once, then slipped into the crowd, disappearing as quietly as he'd arrived. The bell above the diner's door jingled faintly behind him, echoing down the street like a promise. That kindness, once found, never really leaves.